bribery had a clear meaning.
We have been listening there to the Republicans question their witness, the law expert earlier. And now it's Professor Noah Feldman who is speaking once again at the impeachment inquiry, which is now in the House Judiciary Committee, which has heard from 4 constitutional law professors who have talked about why they think the case for impeachment should go on or shouldn't go on. Let's bring in Heidi Jocastro, who is on Capitol Hill for us in Washington, D.C. Heidi, again, this is a new phase in the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump. Remind our viewers of what's been happening over the last 3 hours.
Sure. So today was the first day that the House Judiciary Committee has had control of this impeachment inquiry. Why is that such a big deal? Well, because this is the committee that is charged to initiate impeachment proceedings, those actual articles of impeachment, which is really synonymous to a criminal indictment, in a sense, that the president would face eventually if he goes to a trial before the Senate. And setting up the writing of those articles today was the findings of the actual Trump's dealings with Ukraine that we heard developed over weeks of testimony from the fact witnesses, making the case, according to Democrats, that Trump put his personal interests ahead of those of national security when he pressured Ukraine to announce that it was investigating his political rival Joe Biden while Trump was withholding security aid to Ukraine. Now, the question today isn't so much whether that happened, isn't what charges Trump may face, but rather whether those accusations rise to the level of impeachable offenses. And from these 4 witnesses, who are all legal constitutional scholars, 3 who were in the majority had a unanimous answer to yes, this is impeachable offenses. In fact, one said if this is not impeachable, then nothing is. And in fact, the history is watching, and the conclusion of how this concludes isn't solely determining the fate of President Trump, but also what happens for U.S. presidents that come down the line in the future. And we heard some very stark language coming from these 3 witnesses called by Democrats. One said that Trump has attacked each of the Constitution's safeguards against establishing a monarchy. Another said that she had never before seen a U.S. president double down in violating his oath to faithfully protect the U.S. Constitution. Now, the one person who is in disagreement is that 4th constitutional scholar, Jonathan Turley, who was called by Republicans. Now, it's notable that in his published opening statement, he said that if these allegations against Trump were proven, if he indeed withheld security assistance to Ukraine for political gain, then yes, that would be impeachable. But he puts in a big caveat. He says that has not been proven. In fact, he calls the evidence that has been developed thin and says that if this moves forward into the Senate for a trial, it would be the fastest impeachment trial on the thinnest evidence. And he is the sole voice on this panel representing the argument of Republicans that are attacking the process of this impeachment inquiry.
All right, Heidi, thank you very much for that. Let's also speak now to Melanie Sloan, who's a former federal prosecutor, live with us from Washington, D.C., who's been with us for the last 3 hours, in fact, listening to these hearings. And Melanie, as you suspected when we spoke earlier, Republicans so far actually only focusing on their witness, Jonathan Turley, during their 45-minute questioning. Jonathan Turley, professor of law at George Washington University. Did you hear anything earth-shattering from him?
No, nothing earth-shattering. It was all in his opening testimony. I mean, he did let Representative Collins get away with a lot of untruths, and with also Jeff Taylor, the person who was doing the questioning, the counsel for the Republicans. They tried to bring up again the Hunter Biden gaslight situation. So I don't think anybody on the Democratic side would argue that it was totally appropriate for Hunter Biden to have the job with Burisma. But by the same token, that it has nothing to do with why President Trump was never really interested in whether there was actual corruption. He just wanted an investigation so it would hurt Vice President Joe Biden in the campaign. So that sort of went on, and Mr. Turley certainly could have corrected that. But basically, Mr. Turley is just repeating the same arguments, which is that this is going on too quickly and there's not enough evidence. But again, they don't get to the point that the Republican administration, the Trump administration, has refused to cooperate and has refused to provide the witnesses that would indeed provide additional facts. And by the same token, there has been an enormous amount of evidence that the money was withheld from the Ukraine, that the Ukraine knew that the money was being withheld, and that President Trump was withholding the money asking for the Ukraine to say that there was an investigation into Mr. Biden and to Hunter Biden. So it's not clear what evidence would be sufficient for Mr. Turley, in fact.
Yeah, his whole argument is based on the fact that the process, the impeachment process, is flawed in his view. We've heard from these constitutional experts, three who were brought by the Democrats, and Jonathan Turley by the Republicans. What is this going to change, in your view, Melanie, if anything?
I don't think it's going to change anything. I think that they're both trying to lay out their case. The Republicans in the House Intelligence Committee hearings were much more fiery. I think one thing we've seen that's been interesting here is that Representative Collins, who is a very fiery supporter sometimes of President Trump's, was quite calm and measured in his questioning. And I think they're trying to make the case that there is no constitutional case for impeachment, just like the Democrats are making out that there is a constitutional case for impeachment. And again, I think both sides are using these law professors and the testimony they provide to try and persuade anybody left in the middle, perhaps, who already doesn't have a view on this, and yet by the same token, nearly every American already has a view, if in fact they're watching this at all.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you so much for joining us. Melanie Sloan, a former federal prosecutor, commenting the hearings today in the House Judiciary Committee.